The next star, Proxima Centauri, pick up another soccer ball and walk 2,000 miles. That gives you the scale, and that's the nearest star, let alone the edge of the galaxy and the next door galaxy.
Yeah, so we are fighting against the sort of limits of our own imaginations, and you as scientists are having to find ways to help us overcome those limits.
Our brains and our intuition were honed by natural selection to cope with life on the African savannah, where nothing moves faster than an antelope, and nothing is smaller than a flea that you can see moving. And we're just not, you might think, equipped to cope with quantum theory, to cope with relativity. What's astonishing is that the human brain actually does cope with modern physics.
Not very many of them, though.
Admittedly, not very many of them, no, that's right. But the astonishing thing is that any of us can. I certainly can't. It's an amazing thing that any of us can. And I suppose we have to admit that, and Steven Pinker again says this, that we have no right to assume that the human brain is anything like equipped to deal with the immensity of the problems faced by physics.
I mean, as in your role as chair of public understanding of science, did you feel that there were particularly sort of difficult problems that you were struggling to solve? In terms of, are there sort of sciences that can't be popularised? Are there sciences that remain the preserve?
Yes, I think
very small.
In my field, nothing on the scale of physics. I think physicists have a much harder time. Biology, I suppose the hard problem of consciousness is the worst of them that we have to cope with. I think just the immensity of geological time and astronomical space, but that's just a matter of scale. It's not deeply, profoundly difficult in the way that quantum theory is.
I mean, it's very interesting because obviously this book goes back for probably about 30 years, doesn't it? The pieces sort of started in maybe the late 80s, early 90s. And I feel like the public prestige of science has changed a lot during that time. I mean, the sort of C.P. Snow two cultures idea of these things existing in separate spheres, and certainly the purveyors of the arts not needing to understand science. Does that feel true still? Does it feel acceptable to have no grounding in science as an ordinary person now?
I think it's getting a little bit better. There was a time when people educated in the arts felt, or at least purported to feel, almost proud of being ignorant of science.
My mother has always boasted about being terrible at maths.
Yes.
The Cambridge graduate struck me as odd.
Yes, that's right. I think it's got a bit better than that. I berated Bernard Levin, I think, in Unleaving the Rainbow, about trying to make fun of science, though somehow science is just, it's the joke item that comes at the end of the news. Also, in one of your essays in the book, actually, there's a sort of editorial comment about someone saying, making a very uneducated. That's right. What was it?
I can't remember.
That's right. It was a finding, a public opinion poll indicated that I think it was something like 19% of the British population think that it takes 1 month for the Earth to orbit the Sun. And the editor of the Daily Telegraph said, "Doesn't it, Ed? Look at me, how clever I am. I don't know any science." Well, of course he knew enough science. He was faking it, but you're making a joke at the expense of what fun it is to be ignorant of science. It's as though you thought that Shakespeare wrote the Odyssey, something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that, what the last 18 months has done with COVID is it's shown both it's highlighted both people's faith in science.